All right, joining us now, PWI editor Kevin McElvaney for a very important conversation. Wanted to have Kevin part of this because it's not too often you're talking about Vince McMahon stepping down from WWE. It's something that we knew would probably come in our lifetime. I don't know that we could have predicted that these would be the circumstances. Brian, in some ways, not a surprise because our last episode, we were talking about just this, about kind of the dam breaking, the allegations being too much in a publicly traded company for McMahon to stay at the helm. We talked about, Nick Khan's rise and growing influence. And sure enough, days later, McMahon sends the letter out. He's retiring. Nick Khan and Stephanie installed as co-CEOs. We found out sometime after that Triple H is now head of creative. So lots to digest here. First, I guess I give to Kevin in terms of stories. Is this one of the biggest stories in wrestling history and certainly our lifetime?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around that. And of course, as luck would have it, it happens right after we go to press.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that we didn't see it coming, because this has been going on for a few weeks. And in fact, Harry Burkett's ringside column in the November issue kind of talks about, it looks like it might be the end of the 5-decade run of Vince McMahon. So I think we all knew it was headed in this direction. The way it's played out has sort of surprised me. I didn't think, it seems that it's more of a not clerical, but accounting or technical error that they've gotten him on.
It's very Al Capone-like.
It is, right. Yeah. He was sent Al Capone was imprisoned for tax evasion or something like that. Right? Yeah. So it is like that, because it seems like it's a problem of the T's not being crossed, I's not being dotted, rather than the alleged behavior, which, granted, if it looks like there has been some very problematic behavior, you can't necessarily prove it all right now, and it would be this long drawn out process, but there's unquestionably this technicality, then I think that's probably just the easier way to end things, is to have him step down. And it's a massive story. But there's definitely a large part of me that thought he would just do this until he died.
Yeah.
That would be it. No matter how old and questionable he was.
That was the plan, right? I mean,
obviously
that
would have been his choice, certainly.
Yeah. So, Brian, in terms of, again, so much to talk about here. First of all, is this, and when you take it in with all the changes that we're seeing, do you come out of this feeling optimistic about WWE's future? Is it, how much of this is a good news story and how much of this is a bad news story?
I think it's very cool and hip to seem like cynical about everything and doom and gloom. I've already seen people online being like, it's just going to be the same as ever, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that. And I'm cautiously optimistic here, because I think they have to realize this, that what they've got here in talking about turning lemons into lemonade is a very unique opportunity, a moment in time where you can go one of two ways. You can do exactly that and just keep it going the way it is, or you can say, this is our moment to take all the negative feedback we've ever gotten these past few years and all the things that deep down a lot of us know are true, and fix them and really build goodwill with the fans. And I think Kevin Dunn's days are numbered for sure. We've seen now Pritchard is out, Laurinaitis is out. I mean, this is a moment in time. And I think personally that they're going to take advantage of that. I really do. The one element that I didn't see coming, and I really should have, is the whole Triple H reboot thing. This really feels like it was some kind of weird power play that's been playing out here, even within the family. And so with him back in that role, I think for better or worse, there are going to be dramatic changes, because I mean, there are things that he probably always had wanted to do and couldn't do. And I think even the media partners who have to want better ratings, they have to, even if they like Vince, we hear a lot of times that they have confidence in him. They have to be open to improving the product to get better ratings and get, the numbers up and things like that, so that they can justify the money that they're paying to WWE. So I am hopeful. I will see if I'm right or not. I'm actually hopeful that this is going to lead to good things.
It's fascinating. I was just watching an old episode of Superstars a few days ago that just happened to be Triple H's debut match. It might have been Challenge or something. And McMahon was on commentary, and it's just crazy thinking like, and kind of the innocuous remarks about Triple H and all this. And to think like, wow, this one day this guy's taking your job. It's he's going to marry your daughter and take your job. It's so nuts. But all that said, taking a step back here, there is, and I don't know how much of me, but there's still part of me that wonders, is Vince really gone? Right? He clearly they have turned another page, and you talk about some of these ousters that we're already seeing. I thought it was telling, even the way they opened Raw last night in the middle of a brawl between Miz and Logan Paul. To me, that spoke of Triple H kind of trying to put his mark, showing that, again, this is a new day here. But at the end of the day, the people who are running WWE are Vince McMahon's daughter and son-in-law. And I believe he is going to keep on holding on to a lot of stock. He might still be the majority stock owner, right? So, Kevin, do you really think that his influence is gone from WWE? Is he, as we've talked about some here, maybe going to continue kind of pulling the strings and have some say, if not maybe final say, behind the scenes? Or going one step further, do these investigations, play out, run their course, and in a year or two from now, we see McMahon back on TV and back in power?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think of a situation where potentially he's going to give his impressions and feedback, whether or not it's asked for, because that's his family, that's his company he ran for so long. I can't imagine, even with the stories of Steph leaving the company on unfriendly terms, of Triple H's whole team in NXT being disrupted, I can't imagine that they aren't still on somewhat good terms, and that the succession here was on some level approved by Vince. Although who knows, maybe there's a great Broadway play in the making in a few years, because this is so richly dramatic. But I think certain things are going to stay the way they are for the foreseeable future, because some of it works, and because some of those ideas have become ingrained into the people who took over. I mean, we talk about the show starting on a brawl, and yeah, certainly that's like Triple H in charge of NXT type booking or storytelling, but it's not Triple H and Stephanie as on-screen characters storytelling. I mean, they were the king and queen, respectively, of a 20-minute promo that could have been a minute and a half starting off Raw every week. And I'm sorry, like they have a lot of great qualities, but that's unwatchable to me. And I really hope that that's nipped in the bud now. It's it works on occasion. There are certain people who really rise to the task with it. I mean, but for every Roman Reigns, there's a redacted however many other names, not to call anybody out. So I think that's going to be a little bit slower to be phased out, but who knows? Maybe they look at AEW and they see this as although for that matter, AEW is doing more of these long-winded promos now. But that's another podcast. But they could see this opportunity to come in with this more exciting and action-packed product. I do think that they'll hold some of the same beliefs, but there are others that I think, Triple H is a wrestling nerd. Triple H is not a sports entertainment nerd.
Right.
So that's if he's head of creative, no matter how much Vince is on him about it, no matter how much pressure he feels to not stray too far from the vision, it's going to happen. I mean,
right.
It's maybe he needs an editor a little bit, because you can make an argument it was a little over the top in terms of being classic wrestling at times with the former NXT. I liked it by and large, but
that's the tricky part, is that when I think of the best WWE shows that I've seen in the last 5-10 years, and actually one of them was in Bridgeport, and it's the last time I was there, and it was the NXT takeover a few years ago where Adam Cole won the title, and you think of the glory days of NXT and how amazing those shows were, and how every takeover was just a home run, one after the other, and it wasn't just a product of those shows being good, but the build to those shows being so good. And that was all Triple H. And so when you think of it from that lens, it gives you a lot of optimism about the future of WWE. But then you think about the fact that NXT got trounced by AEW. I mean, the reality is when that product was put on the big stage, it didn't really work. So I wonder, I mean, Brian, how much do you expect the on-air product to change now with Triple H in control? I mean, do we see Cedric Alexander in the main event picture, or is it more gradual, or do they say, look, we've got a pat hand here, things have been pretty good, let's leave it alone, Vince knew what he was doing?
I think it's something similar to what Kevin said, where it's like it's a matter of identifying what worked and what didn't work. So I don't think that the WWE product is going to turn into black and gold NXT. And I don't think that's even what Triple H would want to do. I think he also understands that they're two different brands, and that, you know, a certain, like NXT, he really was going for like WWE's Ring of Honor, which I think he succeeded in doing. I do think, though, that he is going to try to take some elements of that worked and were good and infuse them into the main WWE product to kind of downplay some of the things that a lot of fans didn't like. Like, I know, to sort of find that balance, because he knows this is the mainstream product. This is the main product here. This is the one that goes for not just the wrestling junkies. So we have to kind of find a balance. And I think he's smart. He's smart about that kind of thing. So, like, for example, I mentioned Kevin Dunn before. Like, I'm not breaking any news here, but there's no love lost between those two people. And I know that for a fact. And one of the reasons is that Triple H, or Paul, I don't know what we're supposed to call him now, but he hates Kevin's attitude towards pro wrestling, which the dirt on Kevin Dunn was always that he hates wrestling. You know, all the things that people always lobbed at Vince. Honestly, it was more Kevin Dunn than Vince. Because, I mean, even in speaking with Vince, one of the things you start to realize is, wow, this guy actually likes wrestling. I didn't really expect these things to be coming out of his mouth. It's true. And Kevin Dunn is more the sports entertainment guy, is more the, hating this product that he's dedicating his life to working on and trying to make it into something that it's not. Because that's really been his whole production philosophy, is trying to make wrestling into something that he can actually be proud to say that he worked on, which is a very dysfunctional way to approach it. But I think Triple H and him, that's a big cause of the friction between the two of them. So that tells you a lot of what you need to know about what Triple H's attitude is going to be, is the fact that he's so diametrically opposed to Kevin Dunn's attitude. I think that says a lot.
Yeah. I just finished with Christian putting together the PWI poll, and there's that one question in there that I forget exactly the wording, but it's like, what drives you crazy about pro wrestling? What do you hate? And I guess some minor spoilers here. I think that the top two were WWE production stuff. It was the quick cuts, the quick camera cuts, and it was like the giant CGI stuff. What do they call it? Augmented reality. So in as much as, that is representative of the fans, it tells you, I think there's not a huge appetite for Kevin Dunn's style anymore. That said, and I think this goes for Vince too, I think it's one of these deals where, like, it's easy to notice the bad stuff and maybe you take for granted the good stuff. And the WWE product, as we know it on television, good and bad. And there's a whole lot of good when you think about, a WrestleMania, and just from a production standpoint, I don't think anything touches it, even the Super Bowl, and just how visually amazing that is. And certainly that owes a lot to Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn. I mean, we also talked, I think, in the last episode, Brian, how you could grab an episode of Raw from 2010 or 2011 and today, and they look exactly the same. So
right.
Hopefully that's something. Do you expect, Kevin, I mean, just in terms of the look, is WWE going to look different 6 months from now?
I mean, I think there's some things that work well, and those should be preserved for all the crap Kevin Dunn gets, and he deserves a lot of it. There are all sorts of stories about who is actually responsible for the quick cuts and things like that. But the truth is, he's overseeing all of it. So it's him. It's the same as if PWI sucks, even if it's a bunch of crappy articles that you guys couldn't possibly write, but it would still be on me because Brian, I was pointing down to Brian.
I'm on top on my view. So
yeah. So he's pointing to me. So there we go.
Right.
Works out. But it's, I think despite all the knocks against it, one thing that WWE does really well is these big epic video packages and getting you in the mood for an event. And, I don't see them getting rid of pyro and stuff like that. Could they maybe stand to tone down some of the AR stuff? Sure. But there are certain things that really do make it look world-class and big. And I think if the writing and storytelling and the rest of the production can support that or be supported by it, then it'll be fine, because I don't think it's all production concerns, but that's definitely part of it. But I do feel optimistic that there could be some good changes. And I think, I mentioned the video packages, and not to rag on AEW again, because I by and large really enjoy the product every week. That's one area where WWE has 100% over them. And you could argue that WWE goes a little bit overboard with showing you things over and over again and reminding you. But at the same time, AEW really half-bakes some stuff. And if they could have not a Kevin Dunn, but somebody like a Kevin Dunn light heading up some of these efforts, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world. And I hope that whoever takes over in WWE does not just decide, video packages are boring, they're played out, we're not doing them anymore. Pyro's played out, we're not doing it anymore. That's part of the atmosphere of what makes WWE. And if the product itself can be hot again and on the upswing, which I think it's trending upward even before this, I think it can be a really good thing for them, and it'll force everybody else to step up and do just as well.
Yeah. On that note, WWE was in Madison Square Garden last night for Raw, and I remember the last time I went to SmackDown at Madison Square Garden. Granted, this was coming off the pandemic, maybe not the best indicator, but even pre-pandemic, some of these shows, I never saw the building so empty, and they were pretty much a sellout last night. I think it was legit. And I don't know how many they staged it for, but there is some sense that the product is getting hot again, for sure. Brian, two kind of substantive things about the changeover from Vince to Triple H. One, the close scripting. How much do you expect some of that to change? It's one of the areas that's people are kind of most critical of WWE, the word for word promo scripting, and then two, who gets pushed, right? That was a huge difference in booking, right? We saw, and it's why a lot of people left WWE. We saw so many of these wrestlers get to the very top at NXT and be packing the Barclays Center. When you think about Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole and Tommaso Ciampa, these were stars. They were stars that were drawing big money, and clearly Vince McMahon did not see that. And we know, for better or for worse, he's always had his preferences and what he thinks a star should look like. There's stories of, Adam Cole being pegged to be a manager when he came over, when he was going to come over to the main roster. How much do we see a lot of wrestlers get opportunities that weren't available to them, both in WWE and maybe outside of WWE? And again, just that culture of scripting every word, which was not a Vince McMahon thing even, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That's again, something that just culturally changed. How much do you see those two things changing?
That changed when they started doing the super long promos. That really was like an attitude era change. And I want to say, especially even in the wake of Vince Russo leaving, was when they started getting TV writers and things, and they started to slowly phase out the wrestling people. And so, that might be something that is here to stay, although maybe they just shorten them. But I would say that AEW at their best has proven that you don't have to do that, and it could still work if you give the guys the bullet points and you stick to the guys that could really do it, and not put people out there that have no business cutting a promo at all, and that's fine. Not everybody needs to be able to do that, but that depends, that because there is the template that it can be done. AEW's shown that, and a lot of fans prefer it that way. But I think one thing you're going to see is that whether good or worse or better than before, you're going to see different. There's no way around that, because everybody has their own style and preferences, and you can argue forever which is better than the other, but things are going to change because Vince McMahon likes certain things, and Triple H or whoever likes their own thing, and there's no longer a Vince McMahon there to say this is how it's going to be. So you are going to see change. It'll be up to the viewers to decide whether it's positive or negative, but I think there's no question that you're going to see change. I know one of the things, even like what we were talking before, and it's partly a Vince thing, partly a Kevin Dunn thing, is this sense of almost embarrassment of being wrestling, of wanting to get away from things that are too wrestling. You know, we've heard all the stories about the words you can't use, the terminology, and it's not just as simple as words, but the booking philosophies and things that are considered old-fashioned. And one of the things that AEW has done successfully is say, no, that's not the case. We love this stuff unapologetically. We're not ashamed. That's been one of the strong suits of AEW, and it's partly because they are run by somebody like that who truly loves it and is not ashamed to love it, and they embrace those things. And I think Triple H has a lot of those elements in them, where, you know, he grew up as a fan. He didn't grow up in the business. He likes what he likes, and certain elements there that are signs of that shame of being wrestling. I don't think he has any of that. So that stuff is going to change. It is going to have to be tempered, though, to meet the needs of these networks and these media partners and things. And you're on a giant platform like Fox. There's only so much experimentation they're going to like, and they're going to want to make sure that things are working, you know. And part of the attitudes of those heavily scripted promos is it's ratings, and there's a fear, there's a terror of putting somebody out there when you're desperately trying to get ratings, especially if you're head to head with something, and having somebody out there and not having total control over everything they're saying. A lot of people don't like that. So it's going to take a lot of culture change within the company for something like that to change. But I do think there's going to be dramatic change for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff that is sort of most exciting about Vince leaving is doing away with some of this stuff, little things that in some ways were kind of innocuous, but were maddening, and there was no justification for. I mean, the only person in the world who fought for this stuff and defended this stuff was Vince McMahon, whether it was something like banning the term wrestling or belts, or sometimes they're temporary things. I remember there was a while where you couldn't be a babyface and be from Canada. So Chris Jericho all of a sudden was from Long Island. Yeah, Manhasset, New York. And it lasts, you know, a couple of months. And then, you know, there was, remember, I feel like a year or two ago, you couldn't end a wrestling match, or you couldn't have a commercial break within a wrestling match. So if you needed a commercial break, you'd have to find some reason for the match to end and then restart after the commercial break. And it's all the stuff that's just sort of like, it's a little nuts, right? I mean, it's a little deranged, and it's
remember when everything had to be a gimmick match for like a 6 weeks or so,
like 2 weeks or whatever that was.
Yeah. And
Jeff Hardy's going to retire. Why?
These things pop up there's a few of these every year. They make no sense. They I say that they're, you know, innocuous, but sometimes they have a lot of impact on the product, because you have to work around these just crazy rules. And so whether your you know, your view of wrestling is a little more the New Japan style, or a little more sports entertainment, or whatever, those things, you know, reasonable people could disagree. But some of the stuff that was just downright insanity, it's great to get rid of.
I think giving the announcers more freedom will be a great thing. When you're working,
WWE universe versus fans. I mean, and for announcers who, you know, trip on themselves and they say something like normal, and then they're freaking out, and that's a crazy way to work.
You could tell when you're watching it, there's the pressure they're under. There's such a different vibe when you watch other wrestling, and I always bring up AEW because they're the big rival, but I mean, when you watch announcers, and they're a good example, they're having fun. You could say what you want, you know, not everybody's a huge JR fan, you know, modern day JR, not everybody loves Tony Schiavone, not everybody loves Excalibur, they have different reasons, but They're all having fun. You just feel it like it's a fun place to be. And in WWE, it's always been so much more rigid, and you always get the sense that they're walking on eggshells. There's times where you almost feel like you could hear Vince McMahon's voice coming out of their mouth, saying what he would say if he was sitting there, and that kind of thing, or how they like nervously correct themselves because they have this crazy old man screaming in their ear for hours. Can you imagine what that's like? And and that all actually goes to Dunn as well, because there's stories of him just badgering and berating people on the headphones, and like, what a horrible way to work. Look, I don't know if I was just imagining this, but I could even tell on Friday. Maybe it was like a placebo effect or something. There was a sense of energy and fun and almost relief. Like the whole vibe of the show felt like, I don't know, like when they dropped the ring of power into the volcano, in the Return of the King. Yeah. Like it just felt more, spoilers. I don't know, they were happy.
It's one of the reasons I think that Pat McAfee has been like this revelation that fans have really gotten behind. It is because it feels like part of the charm of him is that he never really gave a damn, and he's just kind of playing by his own rules, and it is
he's growing on me.
He didn't really need the job. I think that was the whole thing. He loved the job, but he didn't need it because he has a much bigger audience consistently on a weekly basis through his radio show. Like if you put all the numbers together, and he would get away with some stuff. He would, he said Knockouts world champion, wasn't it? Didn't he say that on SmackDown when Mickie James was going to be in the Royal Rumble?
Somebody said
somebody is a future Hall of Famer, which apparently also got him in trouble. And he's like, I don't care. I'm gonna keep on saying it.
Well, my favorite is, and this became a meme when they forced Michael Cole to make that horrible forced statement about Sasha and Naomi and how they let everybody down, and you could see Pat in the same shot, and he's just going like he's like, what? Yeah. He's just the skepticism on his face that he wasn't even trying to hide. Nobody would have the nerve to do that.
Right.
You bring up Sasha and Naomi, and that makes me think of another point that maybe I'll ask you about, Kevin. Here is what does this and I asked, do we see new opportunities for wrestlers who are maybe at the bottom of the cards now elevated? Do we see a Sasha and Naomi come back now that it is a different work environment? Do we see more movement of AEW stars back to WWE? So in terms of talent and morale and all that, what do you expect to change?
I definitely think you're going to see, we're going to hear about an overture made from Triple H directly to both of them to try to get them back into the fold in a way that makes sense. And I think you can kind of, given that there's this new regime in charge now, even if it's literally related to the old one, you can kind of give the appearance of this clean slate. And I think you could see some people who've been slightly lost in the shuffle, like Mustafa Ali or somebody like that, do a lot better under this setup where it is a little bit less ashamed to be pro wrestling, assuming it goes in that direction to a degree. So I think that's absolutely something that could happen. I don't know that it necessarily does. Again, Sasha Banks is somebody who can just probably go off and be in Hollywood at this point. She's not going to get all the big roles right away. She might have to, The Rock had to do Doom and a couple other weird ones before he got into the Fast and the Furious movies and all this other stuff. I'm hoping they make that work out just kind of selfishly as a wrestling fan, because I as much as I'd love to see Sasha Banks or Mercedes Varnado in Stardom, I worry about how she would do in AEW with and it really feels like I'm burying AEW a lot today, but just some of the stuff with the promise that comes with this quote unquote new WWE, to me, amplifies some of these things that have kind of been gnawing at me a little bit with AEW anyway. And I think and hope that this is really an opportunity for both of those companies to really just step up. And they're not in direct competition. They're not on the same night. I don't think it's a good idea to do that. I think that's what killed NXT. I don't think that the product wasn't good. I think it was, you had what was very openly called the developmental show going up against this huge product that debuted that had these top tier announcers and legendary wrestlers on it. How can you beat that?
Yeah.
Even if everything else was equal in terms of the matches and the storytelling and everything, like people are going to watch the fresher, newer product. So very roundabout way of answering that, but I think there are going to be some people who've been overlooked. Maybe you see someone like a Bray Wyatt come back. I hope not in full Bray Wyatt form. I know both of you have some misgivings about that too, but there are some people who literally watch for that type of stuff. So if it can be done in moderation and it doesn't take over the show and destroy other characters by sucking them into it, I'm fine with that.
You mentioned NXT, and that's maybe one interesting place to look, because that's one place where you can see what Triple H's vision was. And it was taken away from him and turned into what we have now, which I think it's fair to say nobody is in love with, right? I can say nobody, but I mean, their numbers are underwhelming, and it's not a hot product. There's some good, there's some bad. But do we see NXT snap back to Triple H's vision of NXT? And related to that, do we see a change in recruiting? Because we have seen over the last couple of years more a move toward again, and we saw this 15 years ago or so, sure, away from recruiting from the indies and looking more to the football players and maybe not so much bikini models. That was a big thing years ago. I mean, at the very least, they are. It seems like they are looking for people with some athletic background, but not prioritizing wrestling. Does that change now?
I don't think it's going to abruptly change. I think they're going to open themselves up a little more to signing some of these indie wrestlers again. But I think, given that this is supposed to be a developmental product above all else and not just a third show, I think, and anything else is a bonus. They still want to develop these younger and more raw talents. And I mean, you have a few there who it's working really well with. Braun Breaker's great, has done really well. Another one I really see a lot of promise in is Tiffany Stratton, actually, on NXT 2.0. She's complete rookie, I believe. Maybe was it bodybuilding or something? Like she had an athletic background, but not, and maybe even a gymnastic background, but not a wrestling background at all. And she's taking to it really well. And part of the reason that these two, among others, are doing well is because you have still some holdovers from the previous iteration of NXT. And then you also, they have signed some, and it's a narrower field that they choose from. But Carmelo Hayes is not a rookie. He's an indie veteran. As Christian Casanova, he was featured in PWI long before he was in NXT. Tiffany Stratton has benefited from working with Saray, who's was doing a lot of exciting things in Japan before WWE signed her. So I think there's a way to blend the old and the new. Maybe there's an NXT 2.5 or something like
that.
Yeah.
Last thing on this for now, and then I might talk a little SummerSlam. As far as Vince McMahon's legacy, right? I was thinking about some giants of, whether you're talking sports or show business, that accomplished so much during their career, but it ended in something disgraceful, shameful, and that's all they're remembered for. I mean, you think about Bill Cosby, who was, again, a giant of comedy and television. And now when you think Bill Cosby, you think the dozens of women that have come forward and those terrible allegations. Chris Benoit, right? Another all-time great wrestler. And there's still, folks who will defend him. But fair to say that for most people, his actions in the last few hours he was alive erased all of that. And now you think it's Chris Benoit, and you think the tragedies. How much of Vince McMahon's legacy as the greatest wrestling promoter of all time, as the man behind WrestleMania and Hulkamania and all of it, stays in place, and how much of it, and to answer my own question, to some extent, I guess it depends on how much more comes out, because we really don't have a full story yet. So maybe this is still kind of playing out. But Brian, in your mind, what is Vince McMahon's legacy after all this?
Well, that's kind of a big two-part question, right? I mean, what's the legacy is one question, and will the legacy survive is the other question, right? I mean, I think for the people you mentioned, there's nothing that in Vince McMahon's admittedly sordid history, there's nothing that would compare to the Benoit situation. And I would say, with the exception of Rita Chatterton, which is a huge exception, it's also not like a Cosby situation either, but it's pretty bad. But I think that the interesting thing with his legacy is it's one of those things where there's certain things you can't take away from him, which is, and I think he's a little overly romanticized, because I'll say, there's no question he's the most successful wrestling promoter of all time. There's no comparison, in every metric of success, that he would be the most successful one. However, I think that it's very misleading when you see a lot of people that will celebrate what he did for the wrestling industry. I think it's what he did for his company, and that's a very different thing. So, and I tweeted something about this where, Vince McMahon did not make pro wrestling mainstream. It had been mainstream at other points in history. Vince McMahon did not make wrestling hugely popular. What he did was he made his wrestling company hugely popular. He made his wrestling company mainstream, which was in a way that it had never been before. But what he did for the entire industry was he annihilated it. Now, that industry was going to die anyway. It was going to happen whether he did it or not. But I think if it had not been for the predatory business practices that he put into place, I think we would have seen a landscape where, okay, let's say there were like 20 different regional wrestling companies operating by that point. Cable was going to destroy that. The death of localized TV programming in general was going to destroy that. UHF and local TV channels moving away from local programming was going to kill that. But I think without Vince's strategy of scorched earth and, the classic Gore Vidal, like, it's not enough that I succeed, but everyone else must fail. Without that attitude, I think you would have seen a handful of those companies, maybe 4 or 5 of them, maybe WWF would have been among them, that would have risen, maybe not to the level that WWE became of being this monolithic entity, but they would have gone national to one degree or another, whether it be from a television product point of view or from a point of view of touring. They would have succeeded. There would have been more alternatives and options. It was Vince McMahon that created the monolithic wrestling industry that had never existed before, where it was one company nationwide and eventually to a certain degree internationally that represented the entirety of what pro wrestling was. That's an incredible accomplishment, and you can't take that away from him. I mean, that somebody accomplished that is amazing. What it did for the health of the industry is questionable. I think the industry was on the downside if he hadn't been around and done it, and if no one had done that, the industry might well not even be here anymore. But what he created was an industry that's completely dependent on one company. So, I mean, it's a complicated answer. It's not a soundbite answer, but it's a complicated legacy that he's got. It's a very complicated legacy, I think.
Were you okay with the thank you, Vince thing on Friday night? And it's sort of tricky because I get it, and honestly, he deserves thanks. When I tweeted something about it and kind of struggling with what to say, because you don't want to be heaping praise on someone. And granted, he deserves his day in court if it ends up that way. But just giving his side, nothing has been proven. But certainly these allegations are really troubling. And there's even if you kind of believe the best spin of what happened, it still doesn't look very good, and it paints a picture of some pretty seedy things going on, which again a lot of us knew about already. But yes, he was the person at the helm of providing this form of entertainment that I think all of us really love, and it's such an important part of our lives for so long. So it's difficult to just sort of be like, hit the bricks, good riddance, but also I don't know. Part of me sees, Stephanie all smiles in the ring and 10,000 fans. Thank you, Vince. And it's a little, I don't know, a little gross.
It was a little weird. And I'm sorry, Kevin, did you want to?
No, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say it was a little weird, and I thought it was a missed opportunity because, I mean, it's playing to their base. It's playing to the base of people that are going to cheer for Vince even if he, committed like child sacrifice on live television. But they were playing to that. But I think the opportunity here should have been, but I think they were cautious because it almost makes it look like you're kind of crapping on the guy who just retired. But it should have been instead reassuring the fans of going forward, and not in the sense of like, now it's going to be good, everybody, like not like that, but like just reassuring the fans, like this is a bold new direction for the company. There's great, exciting things to come. Almost like, don't be worried, everything's going to be okay, kind of a thing. Like, we can't wait to show you what's coming up, and turn it into that, instead of just like sycophantically thanking this guy who looks like he may be going to jail, depending on what's happening here.
Yeah, it's hard to say. There are some fraud investigations now. I don't know whether it'll result in any charges, but this
is getting worse by the day.
Yeah, but I mean, in the middle of this recording, who knows, that maybe there's new news out. So I'll have to get this up as quickly as possible. But it was it was a little gross. I get the inclination, and I actually tweeted something about this and then immediately deleted it because I'm like, I don't want to engage with whatever feedback this is going to get. But it was something to the effect of, I get why people who know Vince personally and who have been treated well by Vince would want to thank him. A lot of people were thanking him publicly on Twitter and things like that. And I don't think it was appropriate to do it in the public forum. I think part of the reason why they did do it, maybe it's Stephanie's call and she's trying to save her dad's feelings, because even if he's a total monster, he's still her dad. I don't know. And should you still do that? I still don't know if that's true. I still don't know if that's the right move even then. But part of me thinks the crowd was going to chant for him anyway. Because
they started to before she even cued them.
Exactly. Right. So it's kind of cutting it off at the pass. Like, okay, we're going to acknowledge this now and then move on. Notably, they did not mention him throughout the rest of the show. Yeah. So it was, a little weird. And I think maybe a few years from now, they'll acknowledge him to some degree. I really don't know.
Does he ever get in the Hall of Fame?
It's weird to not have a WWE Hall of Fame without Vince.
I don't think he would allow himself to.
I think it would be posthumous.
Posthumous. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that might be the move. And I mean, like, you want to be careful not to like lionize or glorify any of this behavior. And, while certainly like the numbers are not, and the nature of some of the allegations against him are not at a Bill Cosby level, there's still multiple allegations of impropriety here. And I mean, we're talking about a boss and subordinates, and all sorts of other similar stories or allegations. There was a really very upsetting story about Ashley Massaro years ago, which you can look up. But I mean, there's all sorts of things that were just kind of allegedly allowed to happen within the company. I mean, you go back decades further, you have the Ring Boy scandal and all that stuff. Yeah. So there's all sorts of marks on his legacy long before this. That
Owen Hart,
of course, yeah. But and so many other things in terms of how individual talents were treated. Then on the flip side of that, you have, I always think of someone like I think it was Rhino, grabbed the mic at a TNA house show at the old ECW arena, and people were chanting like F Vince or something like that. And he said, "Hey, look, he may be like, you can chant that and I get it, but like, I will say, like, I had a broken neck and he like paid me through the entire injury and blah, blah, blah." Like, so there are people who feel this allegiance to him, and sometimes it's founded and other times it's like, well, if you do get hurt on the job, your employer does have to like legally has to take care of you. So there's all sorts of strikes against his before this. So I don't think this is the only thing. I think this is the thing that got him essentially. We talked about Al Capone earlier, and he inarguably changed the business for the better and the worse. That he did a lot of good things, a lot of bad things as a promoter. And you're not like Joe Paterno's winning record got erased when he was implicated as knowing about the abuse that was going on at Penn State. Of course, Penn State fans still remember that he did that, and it's still going to be written down in books and things like that. But as a publicly traded company and a public organization in 2022, you have to, make clear that certain things aren't going to be tolerated.
And I think that's the difference between, people always talk about separating the person from the product. And I mean, if none of us were capable of doing that, nobody would be watching wrestling. So there's a certain element of having to do that as a fan. But I think there's a difference between enjoying the product or kind of putting it out there and admitting that it's enjoyable and really good and you love it and it's part of your childhood and everything, and then actually going out of your way to celebrate the person when the person is not a good person. And I don't think there's anybody on the earth that would argue that this man was a good human being.
I disagree. I mean,
pro wrestlers have been conditioned to be subordinate to the office and to Vince and to bend over backwards, and thank them, like Kevin was saying, for things that a union would tell you should be commonly expected by an employee, right? That's the way they've been trained. But I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, I love WWE. I've always loved it. But look, I watch and enjoy Woody Allen movies. There's a difference between saying this is a fantastic, beautiful movie that moves me and and speaks to something inside of me, and celebrating the person who made it, even though you're thinking this is probably not a good person. And that's why discretion is important. Like you were saying, even if you want to thank him privately. Think about what that says to people. What does it say to the victims? Like, I can't help but always think of the victims and what they're thinking at times like this. Like, that's a reason why I will become apoplectic when people will get into debates about Chris Benoit, because I'm just like, I knew Nancy, I knew Daniel, knew them, right? Spent time with them. I don't want to hear about his match with Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 17. I don't care. I was there too. I don't want to hear it, because all I think about are these people, and that what happened to them. And so I think that's the difference between celebrating the product and celebrating the person, Yeah,
I think the question of whether he's a good man, I mean, it's not anything that we can really answer. I think we could all have our own viewpoint on it. And I think different people who know him a lot better than any of us do will have different takes. I think about somebody like Chris Jericho, who had this, like so many wrestlers, this loyalty and this desire to make him proud and for his approval, almost like this father kind of role for so long, and then left and saw that there was another way, and I think Jericho, looking back, maybe realizes, Vince wasn't as good a guy as I thought he was. But you look at somebody like The Undertaker, and I think that was one of the things that was really most telling about that biography series that they ran a few years ago on the network, the documentary, which in some ways, I don't know if I want to say it left me thinking less of The Undertaker, but I thought it was really telling how sort of deferential he was to Vince McMahon, and in kind of an unhealthy way. But he's really a unique figure. I can't even think of somebody that is really that close comparison, where is very much like the mob boss. And when you got his approval and he was kind to you, it meant the world. Or even think of little things. Remember that, and look, he's the boss, so I get it. But I remember there was one of those WWE Network documentaries about Kevin Owens, and I remember him coming through the curtain after the match with Jericho at WrestleMania, and he looks to Vince for approval, and Vince just kind of gives him a sort of disgusted, disappointed look, and it crushed him. It crushed Kevin Owens. And I don't know. I mean,
it's complicated, especially when somebody's, the professional setting does make things weird, and the power dynamic and differential. But I don't know. I think another part of it is the individual can have their reaction or relationship with Vince. I would hope that they would be critical of things he's alleged to have taken part in even despite that, and acknowledge these flaws and not condone them, most importantly. But I think, and I would also like to say, I'm not like ragging on anybody who wants to enjoy what he's done throughout the years. Even like if you want to go back and enjoy Mr. McMahon, the character or whatever, like there have been rumblings of things about Vince for years. And I mean, maybe some of the specifics of these situations were not always spelled out, but there were other things. I mean, the Marie Chatterton allegations have been on his Wikipedia page, I think, as long as there's been a Wikipedia. So anybody, like, you can't tell me that most people didn't know about that.
Well, I think it even goes back to the Jimmy Snuka, Nancy Argentino situation. That's probably the first really big one of his, regime.
So many times we've gotten glimpses into the real Vince McMahon, and they're almost never flattering. I mean, if you think about even like on a smaller level, the Bob Costas interview, right, where he explodes, or Brett screwed Brett. All these times where we've gotten a glimpse into how this guy operates, what makes him tick, and it is not becoming. I mean, it is, and maybe they go hand in hand with him being as successful as he has. But I cannot think of many times in my 40 years or so of wrestling fandom where I've thought, wow, that Vince McMahon's a good guy.
But you probably, but he's appeared on screen, and even I had like a lot of problems with the way he maybe conducts business and things like that. Like he comes on screen and in the Mr. McMahon persona and drops a line on somebody or struts or sells things a certain way, and it's like you can't help but be entertained by it. Like, so sure. I'm not judging anybody. I'm not judging anybody for that. I want to make that clear, but we shouldn't. I don't know. You don't want to lionize really anybody, honestly.
Sure.
The three of us, anybody who's listening to this or watching it, anybody you see on TV, you want to understand that people are people, and you can acknowledge their faults. And if there's a particularly nasty person that did happen to do some good things, you don't have to keep talking about them all the time for ad infinitum, because you just don't have to. You can move on.
Well, I always point to even the difference, honestly, between, because like people will take the cynical attitude of like, oh, they're all like that. Everybody, every CEO, and I'm like, no, they're not all like
degrees.
This.
They're degrees.
And not only that, but they'll say it about wrestling promoters. And all you got to do is look at what I've always looked at, and I've written a lot of stuff about this topic, is the difference between him and his father. I mean, every wrestling promoter has bad things that people will say or remember about them. Look, they're profiteers and capitalists and all that. But as wrestling promoters go, what you always hear about Vincent J. McMahon was how revered he was, how respected, how he had that same thing that promoters get of being that paternal figure, but in a more benevolent way, how he carried himself with dignity, how he honored handshake agreements, how he the general view of people of him was always very positive, and that hasn't really changed over time. It couldn't be more different with his son, who always seemed to have this chip on his shoulder from when he was a kid, and then his childhood, and the way he came into the business, and feeling like this alpha male with something to prove. He just never had the dignity, and I hate to say it, the class that his father had. It was a completely different background and attitude towards business, towards friendship. They couldn't be more two completely different human beings. Not everybody has to run their wrestling company like Vince did, or even that wrestling company like Vince did.
And I think that's one place where you could say almost objectively that all gets better, right? With different people in charge, and not that Triple H is any angel, but I think, again, as much as we know from the public and the private Triple H, there's a gulf of difference between the person that Triple H is, with some faults, and certainly he's got his enemies and detractors. But there's, until now, I don't think anything to indicate that the kind of behavior, and really the worst of the person Vince McMahon is, that exists in Triple H. A final thing, and I want to talk about SummerSlam real quick. It's interesting as far as McMahon's legacy. that it seems like only in the recent past he was beginning to think about his legacy, because he was always so kind of willing to take, other than his on-air character, but he would never show up at the Hall of Fame and never want to be acknowledged. Interviews are few and far between. And just in the last few months, there was plans for a book, right? There was plans for a Netflix documentary. So I think he was starting to think about how he wants to be remembered. And those projects, as far as I know, those are both out now. And this becomes, whether he likes it or not, a big part of his legacy going forward. And that's got to be, maybe one thing we're not talking about that much, but all of this has got to be incredibly hard on him, right? I mean, this has got to be absolutely crushing for him, because this is not, he can dress it up however he wants in that letter saying, oh, it's time for me to retire. I'm 77 years old. This is a downfall. This is leaving in disgrace, in a cloak of shame.
It is. I don't think there's any way around that. Not to belabor the point, but I just would like to give one other acknowledgement. You mentioned Triple H not having some of these same hallmarks. I think Triple H in particular has shown, if nothing else, growth. Both in his executive role and how he conducts himself. And I mean, like, imagine the selfish Triple H, not putting anybody over for ages and ages. Not really. Let's be honest. Like, he didn't lose matches. He had that belt all the time. He then goes and takes the same kinds of wrestlers that he would never have considered losing a match 2 years ago. And he puts them front and center because he recognizes that there's something there. And he, I despite the fact that China was such a phenomenon, otherwise you couldn't make too many arguments that Triple H did much for women during his active career. But behind the scenes, sure he did. NXT's women's division was a huge selling point, and part of the reason that the main roster then went along those same lines and featured women more. So I just want to put that out there, but before anything else, and it seems like I'm just being super negative on the way things are going, because I think there's a lot to look forward to. And that's regardless of how Vince feels right now. He can go feel that way because he's retired.
First thing we've got to look forward to real quick, and I don't want to spend too much time with this, SummerSlam this Saturday, one of the biggest shows of the year. We've got the card, Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar yet again at the top. I give them credit. They somehow yet again done a pretty good job of making it feel important. I expect it to be a really exciting match with the last man standing stipulation. We've got Becky and Bianca for the third time, rematch from WrestleMania and from SummerSlam, Liv Morgan and Ronda Rousey. We've got Logan Paul wrestling The Miz. We've got a tag team championship match with Jeff Jarrett refereeing. So I think they've, given the cards they have, they've put together a pretty strong show. The stadium atmosphere is going to probably push it to that next level. There's nothing on the card that jumps out to me as I can't wait to see this match. But also there's, unless I'm forgetting something, there's nothing in the match that sounds like it's going to be bad. I mean, it sounds like top to bottom, it's going to be a pretty strong lineup and a fun night of wrestling. Add to that, is this where Triple H and Stephanie, try to kind of make it clear that this is a new day? Do they try to put their stamp on this? And then the other part is, are there surprises? Last year SummerSlam ended with the return of Brock Lesnar. A year before that, it ended with the return of Roman Reigns. So do we see something? Is it John Cena? Is it The Rock? Who knows? Brian, there's a lot there. What are you looking forward to for SummerSlam this Saturday?
Well, I'm also impressed how they somehow made this match seem interesting again. We've seen it a million times. Meaning Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. But sometimes there's something to be said for that, because we always talk about these romanticized rivalries where guys did have a million matches against each other. I mean, and sometimes it works, and I think the way they're trying to spin this match as like a generation defining rivalry at this point, I think is the way to go. Because and I don't know if they're going to honor the stipulation of the last time ever or wherever they're calling it, but I mean, that's also a smart way to go with it too, because it makes something you've seen. See, this is a strength of WWE booking. They're really good at making things that you've seen a bunch of times seem special every time you see them. So yeah, I mean, I also think what helps for a show like now what they've been doing with SummerSlam with the giant stadium crowds and things, that gives an extra angle on it and a spin on it. It makes anything seem extra important. So it's funny you mentioned how, and I would agree with you, how there isn't any like one match on the card though, where you're like, oh, wow, that's the match where, you see that happen recently with, the opposite, meaning with like Forbidden Door, with AEW and New Japan, or Death Before Dishonor, or the Ring of Honor, where like you can pinpoint and go, oh my God, Briscoe's an FTR. Like that's worth the price of admission, or, like this match is going to tear the house down. WWE is much more about the package. And that's not to say that they don't have matches that have that effect, but they're much better at the package of like, I'm going to watch this. I'm looking forward to it because it's SummerSlam. People don't say I'm looking forward to this because it's Double or Nothing. You know what I mean? Like it's still a sense of like, sell me on this show more, not saying that WWE doesn't have to do that, but WWE is really good at the package event. You want to buy this because it's SummerSlam. You want to buy this because it's WrestleMania, because it's Royal Rumble. And they've succeeded with this show. Like it does have a special feeling.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to, Kevin? Any big surprises you're counting on? Does Theory cash in and win the title?
I hope not. That's partly personal reasons, but I could see it. I don't know. I think you gotta have someone along the lines of John Cena, or I mean, if the Rock was ever going to come back,
yeah.
I don't know that there's anything to suggest he will. I'm sure he's busy filming something right now. But
one thing I just noticed before I jumped on, for what it's worth, Fortnite is releasing a John Cena skin, I think, like today or tomorrow, and it's like SummerSlam themed.
Wow. Right. Okay.
I could very much see if Theory cashes in successfully at the end of the night, Cena coming out immediately to chat, because they've had their back and forth. I would hope that's not where they're going next, but remains to be seen. I'm curious what we'll find out in a few weeks, if there were any plans that were kind of changed last minute, that things were headed in a certain direction. And then there was an audible call to whether they're just going to see through whatever was planned, because that was what was being built. But I think it'll be a solid show. I think, we went into WrestleMania not expecting a lot, and it really over-delivered, especially that first night. Last year's SummerSlam, I remember being a mostly good show from top to bottom, despite the questionable stuff they did with Bianca and Becky. So it'll be good to see a nice stadium show on a Saturday night, and not have to get up and come into the office here.
Love the Saturday pay-per-views. I really do. I mean, I think that's a Nick Khan thing, and very much welcome. A little bit of a fantasy booking here, Brian, that I just thought of. So does Theory cash in mid-match like Seth did, right? You make it a triple threat. Theory could get the pin on Brock, right? So Roman never loses, never doesn't have a pinfall on his record. That's how you split up the titles. So him cashing in is only good for one championship. So I don't know, take your pick, which one. Roman keeps one belt. Theory now has a one belt. And then, do you have Cena come in and beat him or something? But maybe that also something we've talked a lot about. What do you do about those unified titles? Maybe that's a way to break them up again.
I would say I hadn't considered that. Separating the belts might be the only way that they try to pull off something like that with Theory, because I think having him completely dethrone Roman, even if it's by pinning Brock, is really dumb. I mean, there's no other more articulate way to put it than that. Really dumb. I'm not saying Roman has to hold it forever. I'm not even saying that he needs to hold it for, like we've talked about, for if he's going to face The Rock. But if he's going to lose it, it's got to be something special. I mean, especially after all this, it should be. I'm not saying it has to be Cody. Probably should be Cody. Could be The Rock. Something worthy. That would be disastrous to me. I almost, to be honest with you, with the Vince stuff, I don't even know if there's a guarantee that this kid is going to keep getting the push he's been getting. This may wind up being.
Roman had a line about it last night.
That was amazing what he said there. Your daddy's not here anymore. That I almost fell out of my chair when he said that.
But people have pointed out he was still on the show for a while, and Triple H originally hired him from Evolve, I think. But he's had baggage that has since sprung up. So,
well, it could be what it could be. And this is part of what I was thinking was it might turn out to be instead the very kind of ritualistic ending of his push, in the sense that he will try to cash in and just get obliterated. Yeah. And then that's the end of the Theory push. It could be that too.
Yeah. But I see a guy with a young guy with a big upside. I think Theory, I mean, do you lose your rabbi in McMahon not being around anymore? That was probably exaggerate to some extent how much of a difference that it made. I mean, I think that was on air mostly, but I think Theory has enough of an upside that he'll probably stay mostly on track, even if maybe he has to take a step back. Yeah. Anyhow, we've gone almost 2 hours here, but obviously a lot to cover. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. Looking forward to watching SummerSlam, hopefully live tweeting. Thanks again to Laura Brubaker for joining us, talking about the covers. Anything else you guys want to? I don't think I've mentioned the website yet, pwi-online.com. Go there to pick up the latest issue, to subscribe. Anything else we're looking to promote, Kevin?
Let me put a plug in for the digital edition, the new one. I know we've talked about it a little bit on here, but what this is now, we used to have a separate mobile edition. You could subscribe on your iPhone or your Android, or you could subscribe on Zinio and get the digital version on your desktop. They were kind of two different things. They're unified, not unlike so many championship belts now. So there will be if you go and you sign up, and we have really good rate for that. It's $29.99. Links right on the front page of our website. And I believe we are still running a special. You can buy directly from us for $24.99. That may not be up there by the time this goes out, but you get a single login. You can use it on Zinio. If you have an iPad and an Android, you can use it on all three. It's the same price. You get your subscription. You'll have those issues as back issues. Even if you decide a year out you don't want to subscribe anymore, you still own those. Same if you buy your individual ones. There's back issues on there going back to 2011. We may sell some of those in bundle packs at some point, but for now you can go back, you can purchase those. And this is a great app. It's basically customized for absolutely everything now. And I know that's what we've been saying for a while, but now it really is. There's a special web app. You can have it as this downloadable separate piece if you have a Chrome browser. And there are just so many things you can do. You can change the screen color. If you have an iPhone, you can have Siri read it to you. You could look at PDF versions, customize mobile versions, zoom in and out. It's just a really, really awesome product. And it's a great way to make sure that you get every single issue delivered as soon as it's released digitally. And then, of course, the print edition is our flagship, and that's our baby. And we have the October issue that's on newsstands now with Thunder Rosa and I pointed wrong. Jade Cargill on the cover. So go check that out at pwi-online.com.
Excellent. And Brian, why don't you tell people where they can pick up your book?
Okay, why not? Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real life story of wrestling's original Sheik. It's digital, it's in print, and there's the audiobook narrated by myself on Amazon.com. That's pretty much the best place to find it now that they're fully stocked there. You can get any one of those editions there. Got a couple of signings coming up too, actually.
Oh, really? One tell us about those.
They're localized. I mean, if you're in the New York, New Jersey area, I'm going to be August 20th at WrestleBash 22, which is a pretty huge event where I will be by far the least known person there. They have a huge, amazing list of people, on their website, but that's in Parsippany, New Jersey on August 20th. I'll be signing books there. And I'll also be at the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend after that, which is the weekend of August 26th. I'll have a table there signing copies of Blood and Fire there as well. That's in Albany.
I might as well say this now too, Brian. I will be at that event as well, and I'll be there. We'll have a table, and we'll be giving out some complimentary copies of recent issues of PWI. So, Brian, come over and say hi if you need to get away from your own table for a bit.
I will. I definitely will. And I'd like to say that copies of Blood and Fire will not be complimentary, but I'll still be happy to see you there for sure. It's great that you're coming. That's super exciting. They do a good job.
Excellent.
Looking forward to it.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. As always, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon.